In this video, I'm going to be talking about what it means to have obsessive-compulsive disorder, or as most of us know it, OCD. I'm going to explain the criteria that one has to meet in order to be diagnosed, and then I want to share some of my personal lived experience with the condition. So sit back, grab a beverage, and let's get into it. Obsessive-compulsive disorder is a fairly common condition affecting around 1 to 2% of the general population. It is present in all cultures, but each culture's version of OCD varies. What's interesting though is that it has a higher prevalence in some mental illnesses. OCD is found in 10% of those with bipolar disorder and 10% of those with schizophrenia, to name a few. So it's a common comorbidity in the mental illness community. And I am one of the people that experiences this. And if you are new here, my name is Kit, and I have something called schizoaffective disorder, which is a condition where someone experiences symptoms of schizophrenia, such as delusions and hallucinations, but also symptoms of a mood disorder, either major depression or, in my case, bipolar. And I have OCD as well, hence the point of this video. So what on earth does it mean to have obsessive-compulsive disorder? Well, we need to crack open the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, to answer that question. And as I always say with videos like this, where I crack open the DSM, I am no substitute for a doctor, therapist, or any other mental health professional. I seek to educate, not diagnose, and as a result, I can't be your therapist, your doctor, or your mental health professional. So yeah, with that out of the way, let's get into it. And really, the disorder seems almost deceptively simple because you just have to have the presence of obsessions, compulsions, or both. And there is more to it, but that's really the core of the entire disorder, is those two things. But it's more complicated than that because, of course, it is. According to the DSM-5, obsessions are defined by two things. The first thing is recurrent thoughts, urges, or images that are intrusive and unwanted and cause anxiety or distress. The second thing is the person experiencing these thoughts tries to repress them or push them away, or even neutralize them with another thought or action. The whole thing behind an obsession is that you have a thought, usually intrusive, that takes over your mind and then takes over your life. And before I go further, I want to say that I'll be using pretty benign examples of OCD anything in this video because 1, I don't want to get demonetized, and 2, I don't want to trigger anyone. But even with that, know that the content in this video might still be triggering, as I will be giving true examples of OCD that I myself and others have experienced. So do what's right for you and take care of yourself. But back to the topic at hand, know that OCD intrusive thoughts are absolutely horrible. And it might make someone think that the thoughts that they're having are things they actually want to do or want to believe. I'd say a regular person might get an intrusive thought that says, hey, what if I left the stove on? And then they can be like, yo, I didn't leave the stove on, and then they're totally fine. Or maybe, let's be extreme here, they go back once to check it to make sure it's off, see it's off, and then that's it. But someone with OCD would think, hey, what if I left the stove on? And then obsess over it so much to the point where they start to believe that they might have actually left the stove on, even if they remember turning it off in the first place. They might go down a rabbit hole of what they're gonna do now that their place is burning down and they're losing their pets and losing their belongings. Naturally, this would consume their thoughts when it's happening. And if they're stuck at work, well, you might start to realize why OCD can make people lose their jobs, and how it can severely affect someone's quality of life. And the thing is, according to the DSM-5, you can have obsessions alone and still be diagnosed with OCD, just like you can also have compulsions alone and still be diagnosed with OCD. Speaking of, what exactly are compulsions? Well, according to the DSM-5, compulsions are repetitive behaviors or mental acts that are done in response to dealing with an obsession or according to rules that have to be applied rigidly. They can be physical actions like hand washing, checking, or ordering, or they can be mental ones like praying or counting. Part of it is that these acts are meant to reduce the stress and anxiety that obsessions cause, or in an effort to prevent a dreaded situation like the fire example I mentioned earlier. But they aren't realistic or connected to the situation in a realistic way, and are typically excessive. So what exactly does that mean? Well, to come back to the earlier example, the compulsion with the fire situation would be to go all the way back home, check the stove, then check all the plugs, check any other appliances, and maybe even check the curling irons to make sure they're unplugged, even if they haven't been used in weeks. And the problem is that when the person leaves the apartment, the OCD thoughts will return almost immediately. And the compulsion is to go back and check everything again, even though they just did that and everything was fine. That checking pattern is what's called a ritual. And someone with OCD will do a ritual over and over and over again because no matter what, an obsession is never satisfied. And so all these people saying that X, Y, and Z satisfies their OCD have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. But you can see why, after just one of these checking cycles, these checking rituals, it rapidly becomes unrealistic. Another example could be two perspectives on hand washing in OCD. On one hand, you have a hand washer that compulsively washes their hands because they have an obsession that centers around a fear that they will catch a deadly illness and die if they do not wash their hands one more time. While another person might just compulsively wash their hands until it feels just right to stop, and this can take up a lot of time throughout the day. All three of these examples are excessive and/or unrealistic. It also doesn't have to be physical. Compulsions can be mental as well, like saying the Lord's Prayer over and over and over again in response to having an unwanted thought that you can't control. And we all know there's no way our thoughts can be 100% pure, even if we don't struggle with OCD. So someone with OCD can really be stuck on a loop with this one. There's a term called rumination, where the brain of an OCD person will just do mental acts on repeat endlessly. You can start to see why OCD is hell, right? And really, the key to understanding OCD is not the behavior itself, but the aim of that behavior. It's usually to verify that a threat exists or to neutralize it. So it's less about the fact that they check their stove 7 times and more about the worry and fear that their apartment will burn down. Thus, treatment for OCD is more about the reason rather than the action in response to the reason. And there's more to OCD than intrusive thoughts as well. It can be making sure everything is order in a certain place or even. And that's probably what a lot of people think of when they think of OCD, because that's the classic Hollywood OCD. But what they don't say is how much it can drive someone up the wall if things aren't exactly in order or done in the same way every time. How it can absolutely take over someone's day and how it's very hard to stop it. And it's not just, oh, everything has to be organized. No, it's their day will be entirely ruined if things are not organized. So OCD is far from just an excessive interest in organization. It's more that having things not organized can absolutely destroy someone mentally and emotionally. It's a constant struggle of making sure everything is as perfect as it can be. Then realizing it's not perfect right after they think it is. And getting stuck in that loop from minutes to hours to even days. It just depends on the person. Everyone can see something that's slightly askew and have it bug them. But if someone has OCD, that askew nature takes over their entire thoughts, their entire existence, and can ruin their entire day. So things like that can markedly affect someone's quality of life. But moving on, there's a few other key criteria when it comes to diagnosis. Because in order to be diagnosed, these behaviors need to take up more than an hour a day or cause significant distress. And the people who have OCD vary in the level that they're aware of it. They can have good or fair insight, where the person knows the beliefs that OCD is trying to tell them are probably not true. They can also have poor insight, where the person thinks the beliefs are most likely true. Or there's absent insight or delusional beliefs, where the person with OCD is absolutely convinced that the OCD beliefs are true. So you can see how it can vary from person to person. And the problem with getting diagnosed with OCD is that due to the nature of obsessions and compulsions and how embarrassing they can be and how messed up they can feel, a lot of people with OCD will wait a while to get help, because it involves admitting that they're thinking and doing things that they feel they shouldn't be thinking or doing. And it's important to say that some people with OCD do believe that their intrusive thoughts are them and that they actually want to do the things those intrusive thoughts are saying they want to do. A simple example would be that an OCD person, a man, has a male friend. And the person has a sudden intrusive thought that they want to kiss their male friend. Even though the person is totally straight, the thought cycles and cycles and cycles. And the person obsesses over it because it takes over, and they start to think that they're actually gay and had no idea this whole time. And it sounds ridiculous, I know, but this is the reality of OCD for some people. This is how this stuff works. So it can be really nerve-wracking to talk about these symptoms to another person. I can personally assure you of that. And for the sake of this video, it's easier to talk about fires or worries about being queer. But for many with OCD, the stakes are more like saying and fill in the bleeps with your most messed up thoughts. Think about telling that to another person, and you'll start to see why it's so hard for people with OCD to get help for it. Finally, given the symptoms of OCD are usually internally expressed rather than externally, this makes treatment a little bit more difficult to obtain because the symptoms can be hidden and a form of self-stigma can emerge. But now let's talk about how OCD affects me and what that looks like. Because it's not a typical presentation at all, at least according to what society led me to believe. My OCD for many years was mild obsessions of the places I lived burning down, much like the examples I mentioned earlier in this video. So I'd check the stove and a few plugs a couple times, and then I'd be mostly okay. It was manageable at that point. But it wasn't until the very end of 2018 that things started really kicking off. My biggest new obsessive OCD thought was that whatever I ate, I might have an anaphylactic allergic reaction to it and die a horrific death by suffocation. And I have no idea why this happened. I've never been allergic to anything in my entire life except for one antibiotic that gives me a rash. And I have no family history of this kind of thing either. But it took over my very existence and affected every single meal I ate. Eventually it got to the point where I would barely eat anything. My range of foods was so narrow that I was almost getting diagnosed with ARFID. And I was so scared of trying things that I'd eaten for years. And new foods were basically impossible. It was destroying me, I hated it, and I had no idea that it was OCD. And I did have compulsions too. My habit before eating was to check ingredient lists over and over and over again and constantly reassure myself that I'd eaten those things in the past and had no reaction to them. And during the time I was eating, I would ritualistically breathe, swallow, and drink water. All the while I'd be paranoid that suddenly I wouldn't be able to do any of those things normally, and so I'd end up performing this ritual over and over and over again. I would sometimes start meals and not finish them, choosing to go hungry over eating because the OCD would make me that afraid. It was not good. And so I ended up in therapy where I was told that I had obsessive-compulsive disorder, and it caught me so off guard. Because I, like many of us, thought that OCD was just extensive organization or hand washing. I didn't realize what was behind compulsions or what an obsession even was. So I learned, got over myself, and got treatment for it. And treatment for OCD is fairly simple. Like many mental disorders, it's meds and therapy. The first bit, meds, super helpful. For me, it's what's made my symptoms manageable. It hasn't made them go away entirely, but I can live my life better through those modern pharmaceuticals. But therapy also really helps. Cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT, is frontline treatment for OCD. And it includes something called exposure therapy and response prevention, or ERP for short. ERP changed my life and arguably saved it in a lot of ways. And I'm not going to go into detail on what ERP is and how it works because that deserves its own video. It is important enough to deserve its own video. But for now, know that the first bit, exposure, it just involves exposing the person with OCD to the feared idea or thing, and then giving a waiting period where that fear will eventually go away. Sounds really weird, but that's the basics of exposure therapy, is that you expose the person to the thing they are afraid of, and then while they're there dealing with the thing that they're afraid of, the fear slowly gets better over time. And yeah, then they're sometimes all better, sometimes it takes a few sessions, but yeah, that's basically exposure therapy in a nutshell. And the second bit of ERP works to prevent responses, so preventing compulsions. And really this just looks like the therapist saying, hey, all those compulsions, do your best to not do them. So together, exposure deals with the thoughts, and then response prevention deals with the actions. So the whole condition is treated. And that's how you treat OCD. So with the bare bones of treatment covered, let's talk about what my life with OCD is like now. For me, I'd say it's controlled. I continue to take meds for it every single day, and I get one free check when it comes to my compulsions. Meaning that, for example, I get to do a quick check to make sure I unplugged everything and turned off the stove once. Just once. Which is arguably a normal thing to do, I think. I have non-OCD friends that do that sometimes, so I think it's a fairly normal experience. And when it comes to food, honestly, thanks to exposure therapy, I don't find myself doing much checking at all when it comes to anything I'm eating. It's actually pretty great to eat whatever I want again. But every now and then, an intrusive thought will take over my life and try to destroy me. But all I do is tell my therapist that messed up thought, and then we do some exposure therapy surrounding it, and then I'm pretty much good to go. So know that treatment is life-changing, and OCD doesn't have to be an endless hell. There's hope, even when it doesn't feel like it. And that's what it means to have obsessive-compulsive disorder. This was an interesting video to make, but I'm glad I did, as it's information that should be out there. If you have any specific topics you want me to cover, let me know in the comments. And as always with videos like this, all of my sources are linked in the description box down below if you want to fact check me or do your own research. Other than that, thank you for joining me and making the uncomfortable comfortable. I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.